everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to today's video, and today we will be talking about the books I read in April and May. I had really wanted to film my April wrap up in the last couple of weeks, but it never happened. Things just got really busy, so I'm finally able to sit down and film it, and I thought I would just do my May wrap up as well, even though there are a few more days left in the month, but I don't think I'll be finishing any other books by May 31st, so just decided to do the wrap up for both months now. And April was interesting. It was really busy with work. So even though I did read, I think 12 books, 4 of them were picture books and then a couple novellas, so they weren't all very long. Out of the 12, there were many like middle of the road books, and I was also in a really big reading slump throughout April. Even one of the books that I gave 5 stars, I had to kind of take a break in the middle of it because I didn't want to have the reading slump like affect my enjoyment of it, and I'm really glad I did. And then I finished it later in the month. But May has been much better. I'm out of the reading slump. But in May, I only finished 5 books, which is fine. I'm really happy with the books that I finished. I also have several DNFs to talk about, and of course, I have been DNFing more. I'm really happy with that, and I just feel a lot less pressured to finish a book that I'm not liking. So we'll go over the DNFs first. Then I will mention the books that I'm currently in the middle of and hoping to finish in the next few weeks. And then we'll go over my April reads and my May reads. I'm going to try to order them from my least favorite to my favorite for both April and May, and I will have timestamps for all the books below if you are interested. But going over the DNFs, this first one is Temporary, and that is March by Geraldine Brooks. This one I had started annotating and was enjoying the writing very much, but it was just such a heavy book, and I feel like it was contributing to my reading slump in April, so I decided to put it down. I had picked it up for Alcott April, and even though I wasn't able to finish this, I did read another book for the readathon, so I'm okay with that, but I will try to pick this up when I am in the right headspace for it, because it was quite intense. Same idea with Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. I got to about page 125, not too far, but even though I was enjoying aspects of it, I was really struggling to kind of find my pace in the story, if that makes any sense. Like, I was struggling to really connect to the plot line, even though I found the characters to be interesting. I'm not too sure about this one yet. I am considering it temporary. I do want to pick it up again, but I was just struggling with it. So maybe it was just the timing, I don't know, but we'll try this again at some point. I had also tried reading Mrs. Jeffries' Dusts for Clues. This is the second book in the Mrs. Jeffries mystery series. I did like the first book, and I really enjoyed the Christmas book that I read in the series. I forget what it's called, but it's very far down the series. There are like 48 books, I think. It's a massive series, many books. And I just don't think I can commit to a series this long. And I wasn't really enjoying the second book all that much, even though I did tag it as temporary DNF, and I might pick it back up again. I'm thinking I might just kind of read through the series, not in order. If I find one of the books at like a used bookstore, I may pick it up, but I'm just not very eager to continue the series, especially with how long it is. And especially because there are so many other series that I'm in the middle of that I haven't really made much progress on. And they're series where I love the characters. I feel a strong connection to the characters. Whereas with Mrs. Jeffries, with the 2 books I read, I just never really felt that connection, and it's so long. So that was very rambly, but we'll see if I do pick it up again, if I do read any other books in the series. It really depends, but that is Mrs. Jeffries' Dust for Clues. And then I think the other 3 DNFs here are all what I would say are for sure I'm not picking these up again. And I know I don't have to apologize, but I always feel like I should apologize if I'm speaking negatively about a book that may be one of your favorite books. I just feel bad, but I can't with these books personally. This first one here is The Moonlight School, and I actually just DNF'd this one yesterday. I don't really know what to say other than I think if I had pushed through, I would have been bored out of my mind. I got to page, I think it was 57. I could not stand the main character. She is from a bigger city in Kentucky and comes to work in a rural community where there's a lot of illiteracy and lack of education, and her aunt basically gives her this job where she is like dictating people's letters for them who can't write, they can't read. And I just did not like her attitude and I read some reviews, and where the story is supposed to go, I just don't think I would enjoy it. So I am totally fine DNFing this one. It's not for me. If you have read it and loved it, that's awesome. It's just not for me. All right, and then I DNF'd 2 books within a trilogy, and this first one is My Lady Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jody Meadows. And this one is a beloved YA book where the authors basically took a historical event and person and just completely twisted it, turned the story on its head, and did something fun with this person in history. This one is about Lady Jane Grey, and I don't know how far I got in, but I was not a fan of the writing. It's the type of quirky that doesn't work for me. There are different types of quirky and silly, and I've heard people say this book is very zany, like that kind of writing, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes it does. When it does, it's great. And I do have a book that I read in April that was kind of zany and I liked it, but this one, no. The fact that it's YA as well, the writing, it just was not for me. But I did want to try another book in the trilogy, and I did have the first 2 books, and the second one is My Plain Jane, and this one is about Jane Eyre, but again, the story is completely twisted. And I had the same struggle while trying to read it. I just could not get on with the writing, and that's okay. So it's not to say these are bad books by any means. They just weren't my thing. So those were my DNFs, and now I'll just quickly mention the books that I'm in the middle of. I forgot to take it off my bookshelves, but I am working my way through Tennyson's poems, Tennyson, The Major Works. So I'm going to be continuing to read that throughout the year. And I've also been very, very slowly reading The Heir of Redcliffe by Charlotte Mary Young and annotating it as I'm reading it. And I'm really, really loving this book. I'm adoring it, but I just don't feel the need to rush through it. I am really enjoying just picking it up at my own pace and taking my sweet time with the characters. It is a very slow-paced book, which that's fine. I can enjoy it at a slower pace, and that's wonderful. But I adore the characters and I love Charlotte Mary Young's writing, so I'm excited to continue reading this. I also decided to pick back up The Life of Charlotte Bronte by Elizabeth Gaskell, so I had temporarily set this aside with the goal of reading Shirley by Charlotte Bronte, which I did read. This book definitely has some spoilers for Charlotte Bronte's major works, including Jane Eyre, Villette, and Shirley. I had read Jane Eyre and Villette before picking this up, but I had not read Shirley. So I did finish Shirley in May, and in the last few days picked this one back up as well. And now I'm understanding a lot of the references to Shirley, and it's just a wonderful read. So I will be continuing with this. And a book that's a little bit out of my comfort zone, I am reading The Soul Mark by J.J. Fisher. And it is the first book in a duology. It is a, I think, YA Christian fantasy, which again is not always my thing. It's out of my comfort zone, but I am enjoying it. I'm really enjoying the writing. The main character is interesting, and this book seems to have very high stakes. It's set in a very interesting world. And once I finished it, I am looking forward to talking more about the book. So now moving on to the books I did finish in April. This first one here, and like I said, I'll try to go from my least favorite to my favorite. This first one here is my least favorite, but I still enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars, and that is The Tale of Cuckoo Brow Wood by Susan Wittig Albert. This is the 3rd book in the the Cottage Tales of Beatrix Potter series. And the first 2 books I really enjoyed. The first one was my favorite. The second one I really liked, but this one, I would say I enjoyed it, but I just found the story to be very, very unbelievable. That being said, this is a series with talking animals, so you're not supposed to go in expecting it to be a very believable story, and I completely understand that. But I just feel like even with the talking animals, the first 2 books felt a lot more realistic, if that makes any sense. This one was just a little on the ridiculous. I don't know how else to explain it, but it was just a little odd in some ways, and I heard that the books actually do get more and more, I guess, eccentric throughout the series. I think a later book in the series has a dragon in it, and it's kind of going in a direction that it's kind of veering away from that, you know, simple cottage core, all the Peter Rabbit vibes into something a little different, which I'm not really a big fan of. So just for me personally, I think this is where I will kind of end my read through the series. It is a really interesting series in that it's more slice of life with some kind of mysterious subplots going throughout. We have a gentleman in this book, Major Kitteridge, and he has a new wife, and something is just a little bit off about her. This is set in the Lake District in England, and we also have a subplot where this developer is coming to build some holiday villas, and the villagers are very, very unhappy about this. And of course, we have all these animals that are trying to figure things out, and they have their own like animal politics and issues that they're dealing with. It's very, very charming, very cozy. I, of course, love that Beatrix Potter is a character in these books. She's so, so fun. And I did want to read actually the first paragraph of the first chapter. It is just so cozy. And I did also forget to mention that this book was set in April, so it was perfect to read it throughout April. So it says, Wednesday, the 24th of April, 1907. The tale I am about to tell you begins on a bright, clear April sweet morning in the Lake District village of Sorry. The sun has just begun to work its magical morning alchemy, burnishing the blue surface of Esthwaite water to a sparkling silver, turning the leaves of lark and willow to an iridescent opal, and transforming every apple blossom in the village to pure gold. The sky was scattered with white clouds as if a playful breeze had tugged yesterday's laundry from the drying lines in the village gardens and flung them into the brilliant blue heaven, where they stuck, tattered and wind-torn. I just have to read the next paragraph too. It was a magical morning, and the little village seemed more than ever to occupy a magical place in the world. To the east lay Lake Windermere, the longest, deepest, bluest lake in all of England, a barrier of sorts against any modern encroachments that might creep into the village, which proudly described itself as old-fashioned. And it goes on to describe the landscape. So even though I'm considering this my least favorite read of the month, I do think it's very cozy and cottagecore and perfect for the springtime. This one also has a touch of the fae, as there are some kids in the book that are trying to find fairies, and it is fun. Not my favorite. I did find myself quite bored at times, but the writing was very, very charming, and I would recommend the series if it sounds interesting to you. This next book I also enjoyed, and I gave it 3 stars. That is The Inheritance by Louisa May Alcott. This was the group read for Alcott April, and I am very glad that I managed to read it. So this book, Louisa May Alcott actually wrote when she was 17, and one of the reasons I gave it 3 stars and not a higher rating is you can tell. You can tell it was written when she was very young, but it was still written so beautifully. Even as a young teenager, she had something special. She was definitely on her way to success with her writing, and ended up then writing my favorite book of all time, Little Women. So even though it wasn't the best book ever, it was very impressive. Kind of gave off Jane Austen, but YA vibes in a way. Not in the tone or the characters or anything like that, or the humor, but it just had something that kind of made me think this is maybe what a YA Jane Austen romance could look like. I did go into the story blind, and I think it's great to experience it that way. But I will say I really did like the romance, and I really, really loved the characters, especially Amy and Lord Hamilton, the sibling pair. They were very, very sweet. But Edith, even though I really liked her, she felt like your typical quiet and demure protagonist. So just with her character and the story, it felt very predictable, and I kind of knew where it was going. That was fine though. I still enjoyed my time with it. As was expected, there was a lot of fainting and crying and melodrama, but I was here for it. It was very fun. Ida drove me nuts. She was a great villain to the story. I also read the afterword at the end of the book, and it made me appreciate the book even more. And just in general, I just found it very charming to kind of see where Louisa May Alcott started off her writing career. And though there were definitely some eye roll moments, I did really, really enjoy my time with it. Next up, we have The Deeds of the Disturber by Elizabeth Peters. This is book 5 in the Amelia Peabody series. And this one was a little bit different. Rather than being set in Egypt like the first 4 books are, this one was actually set in England. I've really been enjoying my time with the Amelia Peabody series. They are set in the late Victorian era, and Amelia is an Egyptologist. Her husband, Emerson, is an archaeologist, and they are very, very fun to follow. I love their dynamic. And like I said, this one is set in England, and the mystery really kicks off when this night watchman is found murdered. He was found in a mummy room in the British Museum, but shortly after his death occurs, another death occurs, and of course, Amelia and Emerson are on a mission to figure out why these people are dead and what happened. One of the things that I love about this series is the dynamic between Amelia and Emerson. I think their banter is so fun. They're both quite eccentric people, and it just adds a very nice layer to the story. I've seen a lot of people say that they don't like Amelia and Emerson, they don't like their dynamic, and I feel like if they were real live humans, I probably wouldn't enjoy hearing the way that they speak to each other. But for me, it works really well in this type of series, in this type of story, in this type of book. I love it. Another thing is their son, Ramses. So I find to be very endearing, but he's not the most realistic child. by any means. And there are definitely times where I find the way that Amelia and Emerson speak to him to be really condescending, and they would definitely not win the Parents of the Year award. There's definitely much to be desired in their parenting. When I pick up each book in the series, I just expect entertainment and a fun time and a lot of ancient Egypt. And so far they've been delivering in that, so I do want to continue the series and I'm very much looking forward to it. I did want to mention some readers may be bothered by some what I think is mild, crude humor at times throughout the books. I'm not personally bothered by it, but I did want to mention it. And I'm also not sure if I mentioned I gave this one 3.5 stars. Another 3.5 star read is The Vanishing at Castle Moreau by Jamie Jo Wright. And this one is the first Jamie Jo Wright book that I've given less than 4 or 5 stars to. It was not my favorite. I found the main characters in both the timelines, as this is dual timeline, all her books are, I found them to be very bland characters without much personality. They were very similar to each other. And just in general, a lot of her female protagonists, I'm finding more and more as I'm reading more of her books. Some of them, this is not to say all of them, but some of them feel very familiar. Like they have very similar struggles that they're going through that, you know, throughout the book, they're going to get resolved, and that's kind of how the plot goes. And this one didn't feel very unique, besides the writing, which definitely felt gothic at times, and the fact that it's set in this very creepy castle. The atmosphere is wonderful, and I always experience wonderful atmosphere when I read her books, but it's the characters that I've been struggling with. And in this book in particular, I found them to be not the most interesting of characters. The first timeline is in the 1870s. We have Daisy, who's an orphan, and she ends up finding work in this castle, Castle Moreau. She ends up working as a housemaid and meets the current lady of the manor, I guess you could say, who is an author, and she writes very unsettling, kind of creepy books. A lot of women have been disappearing from the area, and there are many rumors of nefarious things going on at Castle Moreau. And so Daisy's trying to figure out what's going on. And then in the present day, we have Cleo, who is hired to work at Castle Moreau by this man. He hired her to help his grandmother, who has this massive hoarding problem. And so the story goes from there. We learn about what's going on in the past timeline, both through that timeline and through Cleo, and what she is finding in the castle and things like that. And Cleo has her own kind of demons that she's running from. Like I was saying, I kind of had an issue with the characters. They weren't the most well fleshed out of characters. The last quarter of the book, though, was so good. I did not see the ending coming. I was not expecting it to go where it did. And I really appreciate the, I guess, spiritual insight in Jamie Jo Wright's books. She always adds this beautiful touch of hope in an otherwise grim story. Besides my issues with the characters and feeling like some of the plot line, not the main plot line, but some of the subplots were very familiar, I did think the ending was wonderful, and I do want to read more of her books. This was just unfortunately my least favorite so far of her works. Then we have Secrets of a Charmed Life by Susan Meissner, and this one I gave 3.75 to 4 stars on Goodreads. I really did enjoy this one, and it is also a dual timeline. So in the present timeline, we have Kendra, who is working on this assignment for university. She is a history student at Oxford University and is tasked with interviewing this lady named Isabel, who's in her 90s, about her experience throughout World War II. And then in the 1940s timeline, of course, it's set during the war, and we have Emmy and Julia. They are sisters living with their single mother, and it's their story, their experience as Germany is getting closer and closer, and it's their experience through the London Blitz and a lot of the trauma. And Emmy makes some choices that leave her facing huge consequences, and the story is really her dealing with her decisions and how it affects her relationships with those around her, especially with her sister, with her mother. This book is heavily focused on relationships, particularly between sisters and parents and their children, and it was done beautifully. I really like how Emmy was portrayed. She was portrayed as a very realistic teenager. She's about 15 years old when the book starts. She is so ambitious and so talented. A lot of what she goes through in the book is a direct result of her ambitions leading her in a direction that she probably should not have gone in. Part of the story is set in the Cotswolds as the sisters are evacuated there during the war, and I really enjoyed that aspect. I do wish we spent a little bit more time in the Cotswolds. It was very charming and cozy. And yeah, I gave this 3.75 to 4 stars. I liked it quite a lot. I will say though, there is a romance in it that I felt was just put in there for convenience, for part of the plot's progression. And I just wasn't buying it. I was not really connected to the male love interest. I also wasn't the biggest fan of the ending. The entire book is told in just regular chapter entries, regular prose, but then at the very end we have several journal entries, which is fine, but I do prefer consistency. Like if you're gonna have a novel be epistolary, make the whole novel epistolary. That's just my personal preference. But it wasn't the case with this book. It was just at the very end. And it just made for a less natural flow with the ending of the story, which again, it's my personal preference. It's completely fine, but it was still a wonderful book. I teared up many, many times while reading it. It was very engaging and well written, and I'm definitely excited to continue reading through Susan Meissner's works. I also read Pardonable Lies in April. This is book 3 in the Maisie Dobbs series, and I'm really enjoying my time with the series, with the characters. Maisie and Billy Beale are just wonderful, wonderful characters. I'm having a great time. What I really, really love about this series, and I haven't given a single book 5 stars yet. I think I gave book 1 4 stars, the second one 4.5, and then this one 4 stars as well. Even though none of them have been 5 stars, it feels like a 5-star series, if that makes any sense. I've experienced that before where I've read a series or a trilogy and I haven't given each book 5 stars, but it was a 5-star series for me, if that makes any sense. Maisie Dobbs is such an interesting main character. She is both a private investigator as well as a psychologist, I guess, if you will. And she is just so intelligent and a very calm and meek protagonist. This is not like a cozy feel-good series. It's a lot more intense and emotional and deep than a lot of other historical mysteries that are out there. In this one, we have a man named Sir Cecil Lawton who lost his son in the war, in the Great War. This is set, I believe, in 1930, so people are still very much affected by World War I. And he is aware that his son was presumed dead as his airplane, I guess, crashed or exploded. I don't remember the details, but he was presumed dead. But the details surrounding his son's death are very few and far between, and he just wants to have closure. And so he hires Maisie to kind of figure out what happened to his son, where he was buried, and all of that. And then Maisie has a friend, Priscilla, who lost her brothers in the war, and one of them was also presumed dead, and she's trying to figure out what happened there. And things are further complicated by Maisie's involvement in this case where this 13-year-old girl was accused of murdering her uncle, who was a total creep, and she hasn't been speaking to the police, and Maisie's trying to help her. And it's just so crazy, like the different plot elements and how they all come together and the different subplots running throughout, and it's just so intricately written and wonderful. Jacqueline Winspear is such a great author. Each book in the series, we're still exploring Maisie's own trauma with World War I and her own grief, and mental health plays a huge role in the story, and it's just so well done. This one, I did not give 5 stars, I gave it 4 stars. I still really, really did enjoy my time with it. There were just some aspects of it, some decisions that were made, certain aspects of the plot that I'm not a big fan of. There were some like sidekick aspects to the story, which I'm not a fan of. There are some decisions made by some of the characters that I do not agree with. And it's very clear when reading these books that there isn't a clear distinction between good and evil, right and wrong, black and white. There's a little bit of gray area for sure. But one of the things I love about the series and makes me want to keep reading is the way that the author explores those interwar years and how people were affected, how the economy was affected, and how the Great War really left its mark on everyone and everything throughout Europe. And we as the reader know that World War II is coming, and there's definitely some things happening in the book, some unrest. People just feel like something, like there's this impending event that's coming. And there is some mention of this new hotshot in Germany, someone we all know, and how he seems to be giving the German people hope, but we know where things are going to go. And there's just this sense of melancholy throughout the book, and these characters are all dealing with PTSD and grief and just struggling to move on, not realizing that their lives are going to be upended again with another war. It's a very, very sobering reality. And this book and the next book in the series, book 4, which I read in May and I'll talk about shortly, I really felt that sobering feel to the stories and just knowing what's coming. But that was a lot to just talk about one book. I really enjoyed it, and I do recommend this series. It's wonderful. Then we have The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon, Volume 1 by Beth Brower. And I forget who introduced me to this book. I think it might have been Jen from Jen's Reading Life, who first talked about this book, and that's how I learned about it. I think it was you, Jen. Thank you very much, because I very much enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I had a great time and I'm definitely excited to continue the series. I've gone ahead and bought book 2, 3, and 4, so really excited to continue. But it's interesting and it's kind of hard to explain really what the series is about, but I'm just going to read the back. It's quite short. It says, the year is 1883 and Emma M. Lyon has returned to her London neighborhood of St. Crispians. But Emma's plans for a charmed and studious life are sabotaged by her eccentric cousin Archibald, her formidable Aunt Eugenia, and the slightly odd denizens of St. Crispians. Emma M. Lyon offers up her unselected journals, however self-incriminating they may be, which comprise a series of novella-length volumes. Armed with wit and a sideways amusement, Emma documents the curious realities of her life at Lapis Lazuli House. And that's really what it is. It's just her moving into this house and dealing with her cousin who is trying to prevent her from accessing her money that she was basically left as her parents are both dead. The reason this wasn't 5 stars is it did take me a little bit to really get into it and kind of get with the flow. It was a little bit confusing as there are, I guess you could call them fantastical elements. I don't really know how else to describe them, but like the book is not hyper realistic by any means. It's very odd and quirky, but in a good way. And I do think it's a series that I'll enjoy as I read more and more in the series and then end up rereading them at some point. But 4 stars, I really enjoyed it and would recommend. I have 5 more books to talk about for April, but 4 of them were picture books and I'm just going to group them together. I read the first 4 of the Peter Rabbit books, and I have read all the Peter Rabbit stories before, but I had read them in a big collection. This time I'm going through my collection of the little tiny, I guess, picture books. And the first one is, of course, The Tale of Peter Rabbit. And we have The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. I love the covers of these. We have The Tailor of Gloucester and The Tale of Benjamin Bunny. I also absolutely love the blue under the dust jacket. It is just so cute. Oh, I love it so much. And the end papers are adorable as well. They have little illustrations of the characters in white. I don't know how well you can see that. And of course, the colored illustrations are just so, so charming. Oh, I love these so much. Like, just how adorable. And I'm sure it's no surprise, but I gave each of those 4 books 5 stars. If you haven't read any of the Peter Rabbit stories, I highly recommend. They are just coziness, cottagecore, pure joy. And the very last book for April that I wanted to talk about is also a 5-star read, and that is All Things Bright and Beautiful by James Herriot. This book, favorite of all time. I'm not usually a big fan of nonfiction. It takes a really, really good nonfiction book to really get me, but this one was just wonderful. If you don't know what this is about, and this is the 2nd collection in this series, James Herriot, he basically wrote memoirs about his life as a vet in the Yorkshire moors in the countryside in the north of England. They're set around the 1930s, and I believe later books go through the war as well. In the first book, which I really did enjoy, but this one I enjoyed even more, James met the love of his life, and then in this one he is married. He does continue to work with the brothers that I find absolutely hilarious, Siegfried and Tristan. They're so, so fun. And I do love the way that the back summary describes kind of what goes on. So it says, now settled into the sleepy Yorkshire village of Darrowby and married to Helen, the farmer's daughter, James Herriot thinks he's finally got himself sorted. But life as a vet in the 1930s was never going to be easy. Quite aside from his unpredictable colleagues, brothers Siegfried and Tristan, he must contend with newfangled medical techniques, delivering calves after far too much homemade wine, and a grudge-holding dog called Magnus, who never forgets. And then, with Britain on the verge of war, James faces a decision that could separate him from Darrowby and Helen forever. What I really love about this book, and what I think made it work really well for me as a nonfiction, is that each chapter feels kind of episodic. It's like a new adventure, and we of course do have some familiar characters popping up again, but it does feel very episodic. I adore the writing and the humor. It's just so, so wonderful. And I also really appreciate how brutally honest it is. There's no sugarcoating. There is no use of other words to describe animals' anatomic parts. It is very brutally honest. Some of my favorite scenes involved Jim delivering lambs, and it's so beautiful. It's so precious, pretty gruesome, but beautiful. I did annotate this quite a lot. You can see that here. And all of the tabs, it's not annotated in any kind of, like, I don't have a key for the colors. There's no rhyme or reason to it, but every single place that I tabbed, like 90% is just things that made me laugh out loud. This book was hilarious. I loved it. And the fact that it's set in Yorkshire too, there is some, not like dialect, but just the accent is really evident in how James Herriot wrote it. I just wanted to read a little blurb here. So there's this gentleman named Mr. Pickersgill, and he would call things like mastitis, he would call it mastix. And it says, Mr. Pickersgill had what he considered to be a scholastic background. He was a man of about 60, and when in his teens, he had attended a 2-week course of instruction for agricultural workers at Leeds University. So of course, Mr. Pickersgill, being a man of learning, was what mastitis is, only it's mastix. And then salmonella, the foodborne illness, he calls semolina. And then he asks James if he can send samples off to the Labrador instead of the laboratory. And an umbilical cord, according to Mr. Pickersgill, is a biblical cord. It's just a lot of really lighthearted and funny scenes with some definitely more intense scenes to do with the animals and their health and everything. But this was wonderful. Favorite of all time, highly recommended, and I cannot wait to continue with the next books in the series. All right, but moving on to the books I read in May. There are only 5, and I will try to be a bit shorter with them as I was pretty long-winded with some of these April reads. The first one is a 3-star read and my most recent read, and that is The Lost Letter by Mimi Matthews. I did enjoy it, but it wasn't absolutely amazing. It didn't blow my mind by any means. It is basically a novella set in the Victorian era, and it has Beauty and the Beast vibes, and it's a second chance romance as well. We have Sylvia, who was once a society beauty, but her father commits suicide, and that leaves her destitute and working as a governess. And then we have Sebastian, who was, I guess, an old flame, if you will, and he returns from battle injured, and he is injured in body and in spirit for sure. His father and brother had also died, so he's left with the earldom and is just not the happiest of campers. And I'm just going to read the last little bit of the book's summary from Goodreads. It says, "A week together in the remote Victorian countryside is the last thing either of them wanted. But when fate intervenes to reunite them, will a beastly earl and an impoverished beauty finally find their happily ever after? Or are some fairy tale endings simply not meant to be?" I gave it 3 stars, mostly because it was very predictable. You know 100% where the story is going from almost the get-go, and that's fine. It was a nice palate cleanser of a read, and I did enjoy it, and I think Mimi Matthews is a wonderful writer, and I do want to read all of her historical romance novels. So I did enjoy it for the fact that she's a wonderful writer. There were some funny moments. Sebastian has a really funny sister. I forget her name, but she was a lot of fun. And yeah, it was a really quick, easy read. I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to continuing with my journey through Mimi Matthews' works. And then I did mention I read Messenger of Truth by Jacqueline Winspear. This is book 4 in the Maisie Dobbs series, and I really, really loved this one. This one I liked just a smidge more than book 3, Pardonable Lies. And everything I said about book 3 in terms of the themes and all of that, it stands with this book too. But this one, the mystery has to do with an artist who fell from the scaffolding, and we're trying to figure out if it was intentional, if someone actually caused him to fall, or if it was an accident. The artist who died, he has a very, very eccentric family, and getting to know the individual family members was really, really interesting. They were all very unique. And yeah, it was a great mystery. I really, really enjoyed it. It did take me a little bit to get into this one, I will say. The first third to half of the book was quite slow paced, and it could have been a bit shorter, but the last good quarter of the book was wonderful and actually really powerful. I was very moved in the last bit. There were some very emotional moments to do with Billy Beale and his family, and I found myself tearing up a few times. It was just a really, really intense book for sure. I highly recommend the Maisie Dobbs series if you haven't given it a try. I also read Shirley by Charlotte Bronte and gave this 4.5 stars. I loved this book a lot. And I did film a separate book review for it, which I will link down below if you haven't seen it and are interested in hearing my thoughts. I so enjoyed this book, and unpopular opinion, I think it's better than Jane Eyre. So that is Shirley. Please go watch that video if you haven't, and if you did want to hear more thoughts. It was a wonderful read. I have 2 more books to talk about, both received 5 stars. This first one here is The Amazing Mrs. Pollifax by Dorothy Gilman. This was a buddy read with the lovely Jen from Jen's Reading Life. I'll have her channel linked below, and we both adored this book. This is the second book in the Mrs. Pollifax series, and I am definitely going to read every single book in the series. I'm loving it so much. But in this one, Mrs. Pollifax is sent by the CIA to Istanbul, and it has to do with this missing communist agent. And this is set, I think, in the 60s, so the political landscape was quite different than it is now. But she's sent to Istanbul, and what should be a very, very simple mission ends up snowballing as expected, and she goes on some crazy adventures. I just adored this book. The plot pacing is great. It is so propulsive. You just keep turning the page. You can't put it down. Some awesome characters were introduced, and I would be heartbroken if they don't show up again in the series. We have Colin, who is this young guy who just feels so out of place and like he doesn't fit in with his family. And so part of the story is really him coming to realize his own strengths, and Mrs. Pollifax is a big part of that. And he's just a wonderful character. We also meet some other incredible characters like Sandor. He was hilarious. One of the most entertaining characters I've ever read. And I just love how, even though this may not be the most realistic of books, it's just so wonderful following a protagonist who is in her retirement years, and she just wants more out of life than living a monotonous, mundane retirement. And it's just so much fun. I so recommend the series if you want something lighthearted, something you don't need to take very seriously, and just a wild, wild ride. It's so much fun. Highly recommend. And the very last book that I have to talk about for May, also 5 stars, The Blue Castle by Ella Montgomery. Do you see all this? This is just me loving on the book. I could not. I just, like, this book, I don't even have words, but I was highlighting, and this is the first time I've annotated the book, 4th time reading it, and it's like it's the first time. I just can't get enough. I can't get enough. Definitely in my like top 10 favorite books of all time. It's just, I don't know why, I just feel such an intensely strong connection to the main character, Valency. She may not be a perfect person. She may make some decisions that I don't even stand by, but there's no perfect human. And I kept thinking to myself, had I been in her shoes with her family and living that kind of existence, how would I have reacted getting the news that she got? Let's backtrack a little bit. If you haven't heard of this book, Ella Montgomery obviously is known for Anne of Green Gables, her very whimsical and heartwarming children's books. This one, on the other hand, is her one and only adult romance. And she really, really dug deep into what it means to have an unsupportive family, what it means to feel like your life has literally amounted to nothing. What do you do when, like the main character, you get some really difficult news about your health? And how do you live your life when you don't know how much time you have left? That's what this book is. It is Valency exploring who she is. Valency is also an adult capable of living her life, making her own decisions. But at the beginning, she really struggles with that. She feels like she has to just submit to what I viewed as a, maybe not abusive, but a household with a lot of emotional neglect and lack of familial love for sure. And I just love how Valency has this ideal of her blue castle, and even though she doesn't get that, perfect Spanish castle that she's dreaming of, her blue castle in Spain with the tall, dark, handsome prince that will, woo her and everything, that's not what she gets. But she truly finds her blue castle in many different ways. And I just love how she shows her selflessness by helping Roaring Abel with his daughter, who all of society has cast aside because of her past. And she's just very, very selfless. And it really does take a bit of a shock to do with her health to kind of push her out of her comfort zone. And like I said, I don't agree with every single thing that she says and does, but I understand her. I really, really understand Valency, and I just adore this book. I adore it. Obviously, Ella Montgomery has some of the most beautiful writing out there, and it's so interesting to see how the book starts off so bleak, and just the words, I highlighted a bunch of different words that she used to kind of describe both Valency's kind of state, but also the weather. Like, she uses words like rain, lifeless, hopeless, pitiful, shamed, wet, horrible morning, tears, alone, graying darkness, pain, huddled, futile little figure, rain again, sick distaste, chill, merciless light, ugly, sordid room, ugliness, grotesque, forlorn, etc., etc. It's just so many of these words. But as Valency's character develops, the descriptions change, the adjectives change. Again, ill-favored, 29, lonely, undesired, no past, no future, colorless, drab, solitary little withered leaf clinging to a wintry bough. The way that I also perceived her was I feel like she wasn't rebelling just for rebellion's sake. She wanted to be free, but in the sense that she wouldn't be a doormat anymore and just used by her family. I also love how Ella Montgomery describes Valency's family as being a snobocracy, which is one of the best words I've ever heard. But those are my thoughts on the book. I don't want to say much else, otherwise I'm just gonna really get into spoiling everything, and let's not do that. No spoilers for this video, but I just adore this book so much. I adore it. I adore it. And I had a lot of fun annotating it this time and just writing in the book and highlighting, and I just loved it so much. But yeah, I have nothing else to say other than this book is amazing. I adore it. Alrighty, those are the books I read in April and May. It was a very long video. I am impressed if any of you made it to the end. But thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each of you for taking the time out of your day to watch my videos. It does mean a lot, and I will see you in my next one, whenever that is. I'll see you next time. Bye.